I'm joined now by artist Frank Bougher. Frank, I couldn't be more generic by just saying artist, but you are proficient in so many mediums that I had to go that route.
Sure.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about how you discovered your love of art.
Actually, I've always done it. From a small child, I wasn't the healthiest kid, so I drew. My parents would literally bring home rolls of butcher paper, and I literally would spend hours upon hours just drawing, and I was good at it, and I got praise for it, so I just kept doing it. And being in a family of 8, I kind of stood out in this particular area, and it was fostered by my parents. And for me, it was the path of least resistance. I just kept doing it and kept getting praise, so I kept doing it.
You started with drawing. What came next?
I actually stayed with drawing. I went away to the seminary and studied to be a priest. I had given up on the idea right after high school. I didn't think there was anywhere to go with it, but when I left the seminary, I was more interested in meeting girls, so I went back to college again, and that's how
a good reason to leave seminary.
Well, it's how I met my wife, so it's cool. But for lack of imagination, I ended up in a drawing class, and I got hooked. I was addicted to it, and funny enough, I produced a piece for a two-dimensional class, and the sculpture teacher approached me. Says, you really need to come into my sculpture class. You have something, and so I did. And next thing I know, within 6 months, I was hired by him to produce his work, and apprenticed under him for several years, and that was Sufi Ahmed. And I found I had a knack for volume, space, shadows, and yeah.
Let's talk about the process of making these pieces. I was glad to hear you mention that you obviously think spatially. You think in 3D. Is that accurate?
I think in a lot of strange ways. I mean, I started
so
off.
So do I, but I'm not talented.
My first love was actually printmaking, and I can to this day see things backwards or put them down backwards so they'll come out the right way. So even reading, I can read upside down with numbers and letters in reverse and put them together in my head. So I just sort of naturally can imagine what things look like and what kind of volume they have and what that will take. And I mean, drawing is the #1 principle for an artist to learn how to see, and drawing is the foundation of everything for me. And so when I approach something that's 3D, it's as a drawer. I mean, it's about lines, it's about shapes. There's nothing perfectly symmetrical in the world, so nothing in a statue can be perfectly symmetrical. You're not going to get balance. You're going to get stretching one way, pulse things the other way. So I make a lot of little sketches. This, for example, is a sketch model in clay, but it was the second stage of playing with the idea. First, the idea comes, and as I was saying earlier, it's 10 seconds of inspiration followed by a year of perspiration when it comes to the sculpture end of things. It's more about the process of how to get from point A to point B and where you are in the process. The ideas are usually the easiest part of it, and then it's how do I build that, and on what scale am I building it? Often space is my biggest problem. Where am I going to build that?
Sure.
So,
So first is the inspiration, then sketches. What comes next?
Well, in the case of sculpture, it's literally a clay maquette. This is a sketch model. A maquette would be a more detailed or image of the final piece as to how it will look once it's enlarged. Generally, my clients aren't interested in maquettes, they're wanting the finished product. So we usually skip over that expense and go straight for the enlarged piece, which is the way I prefer to work anyway. In fact, the bigger the better. I'm getting older, my eyesight's getting, usually what drives the size is mostly the expense, which, you hear these grand amounts, like this cost $200,000 to produce. Let me tell you, the artist gets a very little amount of that, and then taxes come along and takes a big bite out of that too.
Right.
But it's 90% of the conversations I have about my artwork usually end in the first question is, how much is this going to cost? And usually when I tell them a 5-foot statue probably is going to run you around $30,000 to $35,000, that pretty much ends the conversation right from the get-go. Or we'll need to wait until we get some money for you, or we'll be back in touch, and that's usually where it ends.
Does that take the joy out of it for you?
No, the real joy is actually in the selling of the idea. Before I even have something to show somebody like this, or this is what I show them, is to come to them, I've got this idea, we can build it. A lot of the work I do is site specific, so I have to go and look at the area that the piece is going to be in, and then check out how it's going to fit, what kind of lighting I've got. But most of the time it's trying to recreate a portraiture of somebody, so I'm looking to get as exact as I can, and that usually is limited by the amount of reference material I can find. The first piece I did was a study of Lady Liberty off the top of the courthouse. I had the idea that, well, they have her down for restoration. I would love to get up close to it and build a study of it, and the idea began there, and then I literally went to the county commissioners and said, hey, I'd like to do this for you. I will give you one at the expense of casting it so that I can make others. So I literally got them to pay for the mold making process and the casting of their first piece, and the molds were what I used to make multiples. So I literally got them to expense my first piece, and today it's still my most successful piece, is a 44-inch study of Lady Liberty from the top, and I was allowed to go into the courthouse, stand next to it for an hour a day for 6 weeks, and build this thing literally on site, which was kind of fun in itself. I was a performing artist at that point, but and people would come in, see it in the process, see the process done, and then the clay is really the first part, because then you've got the issue of building the molds. And
Tell me about building the molds. How does that happen?
I would literally paint this with either silicone or latex and build it up in the rubber, and then I would house it inside what's called a mother mold, which is either plaster and burlap, or it's fiberglass and reinforced with steel bars and such. The idea being that it holds the shape of the rubber from the outside so that the interior stays exactly as it was when we removed it. So when I cast a statue, it's literally like that Easter bunny, chocolate Easter bunny, the hollow Easter, okay. And we do that to go up in height and expense, but most, everybody thinks these are solid, but no, they're cast in very thin sheets and then welded back together, depending on the size of the crucible and the pour and everything. To save for my clients, I do all my own mold making, and I pour my own waxes, and I deliver those waxes to the foundry. I have cast my own pieces at the foundry, but I usually let them do the work, because those 12 guys do it for a living and can do it better than I can, and do it much more efficiently. And there's where the biggest expense is. Literally half the expense of what I quote is usually the price of paying the foundry to cast it.
Wow.
So at a minimum with the sculpture, it takes at least a year. And in that year also includes the time at the foundry. And I'm like anybody else, I have to get in line at the grocery. And it's the same way at the foundry. You get in line and your piece is up when it's next to be poured. And that process sometimes can take 6 months in itself, just to get to the point where they're ready to pour. And so a lot of times it's a very slow and agonizing process. And in the same thing, it's about bookkeeping and keeping track of other people's money and showing evidence of where that money went. So it's as much a business as it is a creative process. And in the end, I'll tell you the weirdest part is you've sold the piece. The check was spent in 15 seconds and the artwork's still there, and you walk by it and go, yeah, I did that, but that's not mine, anymore. So, and the other part of that is 10 seconds after it's been installed, everybody thinks it's been there for 10 years or it's always been there, and they couldn't tell you who the artist was. It becomes part of the landscape with the art pieces. I think one of the most common one is the Lion's Head fountain at Lakeside Rose Garden, Sunken Garden. I built the basin and the Lion's Head, and I mean, literally, that was 2001, and to this day, I still tell people that I did that, and they're like, really? I thought that's been there forever. And I'm like, well, no, but...
Is that heartbreaking?
No. My bigger problem is when people come and say, oh, your artwork's there, this is your artwork. It's like, no, actually, I didn't do that one.
Sure, sure. Frank, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
It's been
Thank you.
a real joy.
Yeah, it's been a joy to be here, so thank you.
For more information, find Frank Bougher on Facebook.
Arts in Focus on PBS Fort Wayne is funded in part by